There are moments when someone pulls away from you without explanation, when their gaze shifts, when silence falls like a curtain between you and them, and you wonder what invisible thread you severed. You search your memory for the offense, the misstep, the word that might have caused this distance, but you find nothing. The truth is more unsettling than any mistake you could have made. What disturbs them is not something you did, it is something you are. Something you carry without effort, without performance, without even knowing its weight, and that something terrifies them in ways they will never name aloud. This territory we are entering together is not about healing the rejection or learning how to be more palatable to those who recall to. It is about understanding what happens when you inhabit your own center so fully that others feel the absence of their own. We will walk through the invisible architecture of presence, through the psychology of what Jung called individuation, and discover why your quiet sovereignty reads as threat to those still bound by the need for external validation. By the end of this journey, you will recognize the pattern beneath the hostility, the projection behind the accusation, and the freedom that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself to those who were never meant to understand. The reaction comes in many forms. Sometimes it is overt hostility, sharp words that seem disproportionate to anything you have said or done. Other times it is withdrawal, a coldness that settles over conversations that once felt warm. You notice how certain people grow uncomfortable in your presence, how they fill the space between you with nervous chatter or pointed silence. They may accuse you of arrogance when you have simply stopped apologizing for existing. They may call you cold when you have merely stopped absorbing their emotional chaos. They may say you have changed, and they are right, but not in the way they mean. What changed is not your heart. What changed is your willingness to fragment yourself to make them comfortable. You stopped performing smallness, you stopped asking permission to occupy space, and for those who built their sense of self on your willingness to diminish, this shift feels like abandonment, like betrayal, like a mirror held too close to their own unlived life. Jung spoke of the self as the central archetype of wholeness, the integration of all that we are, both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, autonomy and connection. To move toward the self is to undergo what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who the collective expects you to be. This is not selfishness. It is the opposite. It is the courage to stop betraying your own essence, to maintain false peace in relationships that were never designed to hold your fullness. When you begin this process, when you start to inhabit your own psychological center without apology or performance, you activate what can be called queen energy. Not because you seek dominion over others, but because you have finally claimed sovereignty over your own inner kingdom. The queen archetype is not about external power or control, it is about self-possession. It is the capacity to remain whole even when the world demands your fragmentation. It is the refusal to bend, not out of rigidity, but out of deep alignment with your own truth. Jung understood that true authority arises not from domination, but from integration, from the union of opposites within the psyche. The queen embodies this. She does not compete because she knows her value is not comparative. She does not justify because she understands that those who are meant to see her will see her, and those who are not will only see their own shadow reflected back. This is precisely what makes her presence so destabilizing to the collective unconscious, which operates on agreements of mutual diminishment, on unspoken contracts that say, we will all stay small together so no one has to feel the discomfort of their own unrealized potential. When you carry this frequency, when you move through the world with the quiet knowing that you do not need to prove, seduce, or convince anyone of your worth, you become an involuntary mirror. Those who have not done their own inner work, who have not integrated their own capacity for wholeness, will see in you everything they have renounced. Your self-possession reminds them of the self they abandoned. Your clarity reflects their confusion. Your boundaries expose their enmeshment. Your silence reveals the emptiness beneath their noise. This is not your fault, and it is not your responsibility to fix. Jung called this phenomenon projection. What we cannot bear to acknowledge in ourselves, we cast onto others. The person who calls you arrogant is often struggling with their own fear of being seen. The one who labels you cold is likely drowning in unexpressed emotion and resents your capacity to hold yours with grace. The one who accuses you of thinking you are better than everyone else is confronting their own internalized inferiority. You did not choose to become this mirror. You simply stopped distorting yourself to protect others from their own reflection. And that is enough to trigger a profound discomfort in those who have built their identity on external validation, on being needed, on the performance of humility that is actually just a fear of claiming one's full stature. The queen does not perform humility. She embodies groundedness. She knows the difference between confidence and arrogance, between self-assuredness and narcissism, between healthy boundaries and defensive walls. But to the untrained eye, to the psyche still caught in the dynamics of power and submission, her centeredness looks like superiority. Her peace looks like indifference. Her sovereignty looks like a rejection of community. It is not. It is simply the refusal to participate in relationships based on mutual wounding rather than mutual recognition. In Jung's framework, there exists what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypes, patterns, and instincts that shape human behavior across cultures and time. Within this collective field, certain agreements are maintained about how people should relate to one another, particularly around themes of power, submission, sacrifice, and caregiving. The archetype of the devouring mother is one such pattern, a psychological structure that traps individuals in dynamics of fusion, guilt, and perpetual responsibility for others' emotional well-being. When someone carries the mother complex, they are often bound to a role of endless giving, of self-sacrifice, of holding the emotional center for everyone around them while neglecting their own needs. This dynamic is so deeply embedded in cultural expectations, especially for women, that to step out of it feels like a transgression against the natural order. The queen archetype stands in direct opposition to the devouring mother. She is not interested in enmeshment. She does not derive her worth from being needed. She does not sacrifice herself to keep others comfortable. She loves, yes, but from a place of fullness rather than depletion. She gives, but only what is hers to give, not what would diminish her essence. This is the treason that the collective cannot forgive. By refusing to remain in the role of the eternal caregiver, the emotional shock absorber, the one who holds everyone else's pain while suppressing her own. The queen breaks the unspoken contract. She refuses to be devoured, and in that refusal she becomes dangerous. Not because she harms anyone, but because her very existence proves that another way of being is possible. And for those still trapped in the old patterns, that possibility is unbearable. The hostility you encounter is not personal. It is archetypal. It is the collective's immune response to individuation. When you step out of the prescribed role, you are not just making a personal choice. You are threatening the entire system that depends on people staying in their assigned positions. This is why the reactions are often so disproportionate, so emotionally charged, so laden with moral judgment. You are not being accused of a specific wrongdoing. You are being accused of the crime of becoming whole, of no longer participating in the shared delusion that love requires self-abandonment, that connection demands self-erasure, that to be a good person you must set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Jung understood that the path of individuation is lonely, not because you are abandoned, but because you are finally alone with yourself in a way you never were before. The noise of external opinions, The weight of collective expectations, the pull of roles and masks and performances all fall away, and what remains is the raw encounter with your own soul. This solitude is not punishment. It is purification. It is the shedding of relationships that were based on your willingness to be less than you are. Some people will fall away naturally during this process, not because you push them away, but because the frequency of your presence no longer matches the frequency of their need. They were never relating to you. They were relating to the version of you that confirmed their worldview, that played the supporting role in their drama, that held the projection of whatever they needed you to be. When you reclaim yourself, when you stop being the mirror others need and start being the person you actually are, you will notice who remains, and you will notice how much space opens up in the absence of those who were never truly there to begin with. This space is not empty. It is fertile. It is the ground from which your true life can finally grow, unencumbered by the expectations, demands, and unspoken contracts that were draining your life force. Jung called this process enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. The loneliness of individuation gives way to a deeper connection with those few who can actually see you. The isolation becomes intimacy. The loss becomes liberation. But there is a shadow side to the queen archetype, and Jung would be the first to remind us that no archetype is entirely benevolent. To identify too completely with the queen, to use the mantle of sovereignty as a shield against vulnerability, is to fall into what Jung called inflation. This happens when the ego fuses with an archetype and mistakes its power for personal superiority. The false queen is not integrated. She is defended. She does not inhabit her center out of genuine self-possession, but out of fear of being hurt, of being seen as weak, of being touched by the messy, uncertain, tender parts of human connection. She builds her throne on the ruins of her own vulnerability, and while she may look strong from the outside, she is profoundly isolated on the inside. The true queen, the integrated one, knows how to hold both strength and softness without collapsing into either extreme. She can be powerful without being defended. She can be vulnerable without being fragmented. She understands that sovereignty does not mean invulnerability. It means having the courage to feel everything, to be fully human while remaining anchored in her own truth. The test of integration is this: can you be touched? Can you be moved? Can you let someone see you not as the archetype but as the person, with all your doubts, fears, and imperfections, without losing yourself in their perception of you? If you use the queen as armor, if you retreat into untouchability to avoid the risk of intimacy, then you are not free. You are imprisoned in a different kind of performance, one that is just as exhausting as the people-pleasing you left behind. Jung spoke of the necessity of integrating the inner child, the wounded parts of the psyche that carry unresolved pain, unmet needs, and early experiences of rejection or betrayal. The journey toward wholeness is not about transcending these wounds, but about bringing them into conscious relationship with your adult self. The queen who is truly individuated does not deny the little girl who once felt unseen, unloved, or unworthy. She holds her, she speaks to her, she promises her that she will never again abandon herself for the sake of being accepted by others. This is the deepest work of integration: to honor both the crown and the wound, to know that you can be sovereign and still carry scars, to understand that true power is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain dictate your worth. Ask yourself this question without flinching. Are you occupying your throne, or are you hiding behind it? Are you standing in your power because you have done the work of integration, or are you using the language of sovereignty to avoid the vulnerability of being truly seen? The difference is subtle but critical. The integrated queen does not need to announce her power. She does not perform untouchability. She simply is, and her presence speaks for itself. The defended queen, on the other hand, is constantly managing perception, constantly proving that she is above the fray, constantly reinforcing her boundaries not because they are true but because she fears what would happen if she let them down for even a moment. There comes a moment in the process of individuation when you realize that you do not need to be understood. This is not resignation, it is liberation. You recognize that your worth is not contingent on other people's ability to perceive it accurately. You stop trying to explain yourself to those who are determined to misunderstand you. You stop performing for an audience that was never going to applaud. You stop contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you. Jung called this the acceptance of essential solitude, the understanding that each person is fundamentally alone in their own subjective experience, and that this aloneness is not a problem to be solved but a condition to be embraced. When you accept this, the need for constant validation dissolves. The fear of rejection loses its grip. You become free to simply exist without needing the world's permission. This is when the queen stops convincing, stops seducing, stops proving. She withdraws her energy from the marketplace of opinions and judgments and redirects it inward, toward the only kingdom she has true authority over, her own soul. And paradoxically, this is when she becomes most magnetic to those who are ready to see her. Because people who are doing their own work of individuation recognize the frequency of someone who has stopped performing. They feel the spaciousness of your presence, the lack of manipulation, the absence of agenda. They do not need you to be anything other than what you are, because they are finally learning to be what they are. This is not admiration. Admiration is projection. This is recognition. It is resonance. It is two sovereign beings meeting in the space of mutual wholeness, without the need for fusion, dependency, or the performance of roles. Some people will disappear from your life when you become whole. This is not a sign that you did something wrong. It is a sign that the relationship was built on a foundation that could not support your growth. Many connections are formed in shared woundedness, in mutual enabling, in the silent agreement that we will both stay small so neither of us has to face the terrifying possibility of our own greatness. When you break that agreement, when you choose to grow, even if it means growing alone, those relationships cannot survive. And that is okay. Jung reminds us that not all relationships are meant to last a lifetime. Some are meant to teach us what we need to learn, to mirror back what we need to see, and then to dissolve when the lesson is complete. Grieving these losses is natural, but clinging to them out of fear of solitude is a betrayal of your own becoming. The solitude that comes with individuation is not the cold, empty loneliness of abandonment. It is the warm, fertile solitude of gestation. It is the space where you finally meet yourself without the distortion of other people's projections, needs, or expectations. It is where you discover what you actually think, what you actually feel, what you actually want, independent of the roles you have been playing for so long. This is the solitude that Jung describes as being pregnant with oneself, the creative void from which the authentic self emerges. It is uncomfortable because you are used to defining yourself in relation to others. But it is also profoundly necessary. Without this time alone, without this withdrawal from the noise, you cannot hear the quiet voice of your own soul telling you who you really are. And then something shifts. The solitude stops feeling like exile and starts feeling like home. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you from yourself and start enjoying your own company. You stop seeking validation from people who were never capable of giving it and start trusting your own inner compass. You realize that the crown you wear is not something bestowed by external approval. It is something you claimed when you decided to stop living for the comfort of others and start living for the truth of yourself. This is the moment when the queen archetype stops being a concept and becomes a lived reality. You are no longer performing sovereignty, you are embodying it. The queen energy that others find so threatening is not about dominance or superiority. It is about the radical act of being whole in a world that profits from your fragmentation. It is about refusing to apologize for taking up space, for having boundaries, for saying no, for choosing yourself when everyone else expects you to choose them. It is about the quiet, unshakable knowing that you do not need to shrink to make others feel bigger, that you do not need to dim your light to make others feel less inadequate, that you do not need to explain or justify or perform your worth to anyone who is not willing to see it on their own. This frequency is not for everyone, and it should not be. Not everyone is ready to encounter someone who has done the work of integration. Not everyone can handle the mirror of wholeness when they are still fragmented, and that is not your problem to solve. The maturity that comes with true individuation is the recognition that you do not need to be legible to everyone. You do not need to be liked by everyone. You do not even need to be understood by everyone. You only need to be true to yourself, and trust that those who are meant to find you will find you. And those who are not will fall away, and both outcomes are equally sacred. There is a difference between being admired and being recognized. Admiration places you on a pedestal, turns you into an object of fantasy, strips away your humanity and replaces it with projection. People who admire you do not actually see you. They see what they wish they could be, or what they fear they are not, or what they need you to represent in order to avoid looking at themselves. Recognition, on the other hand, is the meeting of two whole people who see each other clearly, without illusion, without the need for either to be more or less than they are. It is rare. It is precious. And it only becomes possible when you stop seeking admiration and start embodying truth. Silence becomes the language of the integrated queen, not the silence of suppression or avoidance, but the silence of completion. You do not need to announce who you are because your presence does the speaking. You do not need to defend your choices because you are no longer interested in convincing anyone of anything. You do not need to engage with every criticism, every projection, every attempt to pull you back into the drama of proving and disproving. You simply exist, Funtus, grounded in your own knowing, and that is enough. This silence is not cold, it is full. It is the silence of deep water, of ancient trees, of mountains that have no need to justify their height. It is the silence of someone who has finally come home to themselves and found that home to be enough. The invisible crown is the one you wear when you have stopped caring whether anyone else sees it. It is the sovereignty you claim when you realize that no external validation can give you what you can only give yourself. It is the freedom that comes when you are no longer waiting for permission to be who you are. When you are no longer performing for an audience. When you are no longer measuring your worth by the reactions of others. You do not ignore other people out of arrogance or contempt. You are simply no longer defined by them. Your attention is turned inward toward the cultivation of your own soul, toward the tending of your own inner garden, toward the silent, sacred work of becoming. This is the final liberation, the moment when you become genuinely indifferent to whether others approve of you or not because you are numb or defended, but because you have found something more valuable than their approval. You have found yourself, and once you find yourself, once you taste the freedom of living from your own center rather than from the expectations of others, you cannot go back. You will not trade that freedom for anything. Not for acceptance, not for belonging. Not for the hollow comfort of being liked by people who do not actually know you. You will walk alone if necessary, knowing that true companionship can only exist between those who have first learned to be whole on their own. So when someone recoils from you, when they call you cold or arrogant or too much or not enough, remember this: their reaction is not about you. It is about what you represent. You are a reminder of everything they have not yet dared to become. You are proof that it is possible to live without the approval of the crowd, without the safety of conformity, without the comfort of staying small. And that proof is terrifying to anyone still trapped in the prison of other people's expectations. Do not take their fear personally. Do not shrink to ease their discomfort. Do not apologize for being whole. Simply continue walking your path, tending your inner kingdom, wearing your invisible crown with quiet dignity. Those who are ready to see you will see you. Those who are not never will. And both are exactly as they should be. If this journey toward your own sovereignty resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in the patterns we have explored today, I invite you to continue this conversation. Subscribe to this channel so we can walk this path together. Exploring the depths of the psyche, the wisdom of Jung, and the quiet revolution of becoming who you truly are. Leave a comment below and share what part of your queen energy you are finally ready to stop apologizing for. Your voice matters here. Your truth has a place, and your willingness to be whole, even when it scares others, is the most powerful gift you can offer the world.